Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar titled DevOps, the Database, and the Role of the DBA. First, let's start with a couple of housekeeping items. So all attendees are on mute during the webinar, but we want to hear your questions. So if you have any during the course of this presentation, please enter it into the question box and we'll make sure to leave plenty of time at the end to go through them. This webinar is also being recorded and we'll follow up with a copy of the recording as well as the slides over the next couple of days. So just a few items about myself. My name is David, and I'll be your presenter for today's webinar. I've been with Redgate for about 7 years, with the last 3 years working as a sales engineer. During that time, my key focus has been working with DBAs to provide various solutions within our tool suite. So in today's webinar, we're going to discuss what DevOps adoption looks like in 2018. While the database has traditionally been a bottleneck, we're seeing a big increase in organizations who are using DevOps practices for the application code and extending the same techniques to the database. We're going to spend a bit of time exploring how aligned these practices really are and what you can expect as databases professional moving forward. We'll also look into the impact of this going to have on your role as a DBA. So some of the challenges you may face or are perhaps currently facing and the steps you can take to make this DevOps initiative a success. By the end of this webinar, we want you to feel equipped to make database changes at the frequency that the business demands, but with the confidence that you maintain control and protect your data at the same time. And throughout today's webinar, I'll be running some demos, particularly around how DBAs can leverage provisioning and monitoring as part of the DevOps process and sharing some examples and best practices from companies who are already doing this. So without further ado, let's get started on today's webinar, the DevOps, database, and the DBA. Cool. So for those of you who don't know Redgate, we've been around for just over 18 years and we have over 200,000 customers using Redgate solutions. Our product really spanned a range of different use cases, but our specialty lies in helping SQL Server and Oracle professionals manage the whole database development lifecycle. So this is everything from making changes to your database schemas to deploying those changes, monitoring them in production, and everything in between. More recently, we've been exploring how we can apply our technology to some of the new emerging compliance regulations to ensure that not only are we able to help you deliver change at speed, but we can do so in a robust, reliable, and compliant way. Okay, so you may be familiar with Puppet's state of DevOps support. We know from working with Puppet and others that there are huge benefits of DevOps, and this includes more frequent deployments, faster recovery from failures, and also improved compliance. But how does this translate to the database? So given that this is our area of expertise, Redgate has for the past few years done a state of database DevOps report. You can see here that over half of the people we asked are already adopting DevOps across all or some of their projects. So this is a 10% increase from last year and a clear demonstration that DevOps is firmly established in the mainstream. A further 30% plan to adopt during the next 2 years, leaving just around 18% of respondents having no current plans to adopt a DevOps approach within the next couple of years. So a lot of companies that I work with have a clear distinction between the database and the application. When we speak to them, they are extremely proud of the work they've done for the application. But when I ask them about their process for database changes alongside the application, the conversation often changes from, where applications are released, either weekly or daily or even hourly, while the database changes are being deployed sometimes, monthly. So this was clear in our state of database DevOps reports. When we explored DevOps practices like version control, contingent integration, and automated deployments, there's a huge gap between the techniques IT teams are using for the application versus what's being put out in place for the database. In fact, in many cases, the application practice were twice the size of the database. But the database shouldn't and it doesn't have to be a bottleneck to your DevOps success. Yes, the database can be a little bit harder to handle. Database contains data, obviously, and that information needs to be safely manipulated and the content needs to be correctly preserved. With most applications, you can pretty much throw away the old version, put in a new one in its place. But traditionally, there has been a lot more tooling available for DevOps for the application, while tools for version controlling the database, for example, is a relatively new concept. But it's something we need to push through and make sure the pace of the database development is synchronized with the application team. It's unacceptable for database changes to be delaying delivery of the delivery of value rather to your users. So you as a DBA feeling this pressure, not only from the number of requests you're getting, but also the time it takes to deal with these actions. We know that the manual process requires a lot of dev and DBA hours, and one of the key reasons for extending DevOps practices to the database is the ability to reduce the number of manual processes, giving you much more time to focus on value-added projects. And in addition to this, with increasing regulations such as GDPR, HIPAA, and SOX, it's becoming more and more important to create an audit trail of these database changes. So in order to get your application and database development processes aligned, developers and DBAs are going to have to work as an integrated team. So at this point, let's run a quick poll and see what those of you on the call think. Okay, for some reason I cannot see the poll, but I think that's okay. So a few other notes regarding this slide here. So in our State of Database DevOps report, the majority of respondents stated that their development team and DBAs are well integrated, with 58% answering either good or great to the question about the level of collaboration. So this figure went up to 68% among those who had already adopted a DevOps approach to some or all of their projects. But with 11% of these groups reporting poor integration and 20% saying DBAs are not only involved, or rather are only involved when it came to deployments, it seemed that some teams still have a way to go before the database is fully embraced as part of the DevOps project. And then lastly, the other point that's interesting is how these stats have changed over the past year. So last year, the number of people who said DBAs were completely siloed was much higher. Okay, cool. So when it comes to creating database deployment scripts, overall, the large majority are built by developers. DBAs contribute to creating deployment scripts in just 39% of the organizations. Interestingly, compared to last year, there are more organizations where this work is shared across developers and DBAs. So looking at who is responsible for deploying the scripts to the production, developers are now handling the deployments in almost half of the organization. So that's roughly a 20% increase from last year. Then 24% respondents are deploying database changes either more than once a week or daily. In the group who had adopted DevOps practices across several other projects, this figure rose to 38%, with 73 of them of them deploying at least twice a month, if not more. In fact, this is something that Skyscanner has found since the adoption of database DevOps. For those of you who aren't familiar with Skyscanner, it's a global travel search site headquartered in the UK. It's a journey from 3 founders with a spreadsheet to a team of 800 people managing the world's largest travel search engine is a fascinating one. They now average around 50 million unique users across their mobile and web apps. And so maintaining and updating their data infrastructure is a huge task. But by adopting the practice like continuous integration, they are now releasing database changes 95 times a day, 95 times, rather than once every 6 weeks. And surprisingly, this is not a unique case. Companies all over the world are under pressure to release at this sort of speed, but the demand this places on the database administrator are greater than they ever have been. So what does this mean for you as a DBA? Well, a lot more requests and a lot more frequently. And you probably notice yourself having to say no more often because you don't have the time to deal with the volume of demands while ensuring that data is preserved and safeguarded. Even more so with the likes of GDPR and the high volumes of data breaches taking place, your job, is getting more and more complex, as each day passes. So based on this diagram here, this is Redgate's preferred database DevOps process and a similar tool chain to the one being adopted uh, at the likes of Skyscanner, as well as Barclays Bank, Fitness First, Yorkshire Water, and Merrill Lynch. What you'll see along the top is a traditional application deployment pipeline starting from the left, where we have developers making changes and committing them to source control. At Redgate, we believe that the same principles should be applied to databases without having to change much of what you're already doing on the application code. So we believe that the same techniques and steps should be taken, but of course with the addition of the database and the DBA. So while we recognize the importance of the DBA throughout the entire process, we're going to focus on two key areas today's webinar, which align with your priorities. And those two key areas are provisioning and monitoring. Before we dig into those in a bit more detail, I thought I'd quickly touch on two important aspects of this diagram, source control and automated deployments. So with source control, for databases, this is a huge component and a huge um, uh, idea of what practices database developers should undertake. One of the inherent benefits of version controlling your database changes is the simple fact that you now have an audit trail of the changes that you're making to your database, and this is quite critical, especially for DBAs, because now you have the visibility to see when issues may have occurred, and arguably, and most importantly, you're able to identify like who made that change and when it was made. And so I think having the kind of visibility is critical to making changes and fixing problems a lot quicker. But then also with the right tooling in place, you're also able to to do rollbacks with schema changes. And in regards to automated deployments, that's another key aspect of your DevOps process. As I'm sure most of you know already, a lot of times, when you're doing deployments, without a proper DevOps process in place, most of those deployments are done manually. And again, as I'm sure you guys know, when you're doing deployments manually, a lot of times it takes quite a bit of resource and time from your DBAs and your developers. But with automated deployment, having the proper tooling in place, a lot of those time-heavy tasks, such as writing a deployment script, can simply be done by a software or by the proper solution in place. And so I think having those two things in place and being able to integrate it into your process is quite critical to make sure that A, you have the proper visibility into your process, and B, you're able to automate some of the time-heavy tasks that a lot of DBAs have traditionally have done within their role. Okay, cool. So now let's get into provisioning, right? So DevOps requires us to protect our production environment, but we need to speed up development. And one of the biggest issues you're going to have with creating a development environment is getting it set up with something that looks like production. So working with a copy of production database enables developers to find errors faster and prevent problems further down the chain when changes are deployed. It does, however, take a long time to, and a huge amount of disk space to provision these copies. So a lot of times, old copies are often used, which become increasingly unreliable over time, and it could potentially cause, wait or conflicts in development also. In addition to this, the copies are difficult to keep track of, especially where multiple developers are involved. And as a DBA, you're faced with a problem, right? So the development team needs to move fast. They need up-to-date, realistic data, and want on-demand access to consistent database copies. But you have to protect the data. So all the copies of data must be accounted for, and sensitive data must be accounted for. So to get the database in front of a dev and getting it in the right state takes time. And also, disk-based juggling also takes time. And many of our, many of the DBAs I speak with, a lot of time, moving or making copies of database, which has barely changed, and you have to make space for them. So that's something that's a very common scenario for a lot of the DBAs that we work with. And there's compliance concerns, which is getting harder, and this is not going anywhere anytime soon. And you've got people working on shared environments because it's hard to find the disk space. It's hard to keep juggling new copies of the database. And also there's bound to be times, no matter how good your team is, that there are issues with the environment because of the changes someone else has made. So at this time, we'll run another poll regarding provisioning. Okay, cool. So let me go to the next slide here. Okay, so in recent research we conducted at Redgate, we wanted to identify how organizations currently provision databases and to assess the importance of provisioning requirements to ensure adherence to those emerging data protection obligations. So we gathered responses from nearly 500 data professionals from a wide range of job roles and from a variety of industries. So as you can see here, one of the findings on the screen, is I'm sorry, rather, software teams, want to use production data, and this is no surprise, right? So, it's more predictable, it's more reliable, but it's also, not compliant. Um, One thing that we found out, within our research is that 70% of database professionals use direct copy production, in their development, test, or QA environments, which is, something that is a huge red flag, especially if you need to adhere to some of those government regulations. So Redgate's SQL provision supports a database DevOps approach while keeping compliance central to the process. So with our provisioning tool, there's two main parts to it. There's the SQL clone, which is the provisioning aspect, and then there's data masker, which is the piece that will help mask sensitive data, when you are provisioning it down to your lower environments. So you can create copies of database in seconds using a fraction of the disk space, and sensitive data can be anonymized or replaced with realistic data. So this is to ensure that data is protected as it moves from, or rather moves between environments. So let's go into the tool and see how it works in practice. So let me just exit my slide here really quick and pull up my clone dashboard. So with SQL Clone, our tool is web-based, and so the way that you'll access the user interface, is through a web browser. So a lot of or all of the tasks that you can do through SQL Clone, can be done either through the UI, as we're looking at here, or a lot of the tasks can also be run through PowerShell commandlets. So let me walk you through the dashboard really quick here. So the first thing that you'll see when you access the UI is this dashboard where it shows all of your existing images. So one of the neat things about our UI here is that it does inherently keep a very clean audit trail of what exists within your environment. So here you see the name of the image, the raw size of that image, and then you can also see the number of active clones that is connected to those images. And then you can also see the location and the database name for each of those images as well. So let me walk you through the process of creating an image, right? So that's the first critical part of using the tool and being able to clone it from that image to your target environments. And so when you're creating an image, you have the choice of using two source types, right? So you can use either a backup file or you can use a live database. So when you use a backup file, we do support the native backup file type, which is .bak, or you can use our proprietary backup tool, which creates a file in the .sqb format. So either of those we can fully support. And we do require that you use the full a full backup, but you can also stack a full with multiple diff backup files, if that set or that stack represents the latest version of your database. So that's using backup, as the source to create your image. The other option is using a live SQL Server database. So if you do go down this route, you would have to install an image. I'm sorry, an image. You have to install an agent on that target machine where the live database is being hosted. And from there, you can point to that particular database, and then you just go through the process as we're doing right now to go through the image creation process. Just for the sake of simplicity, I'll choose SQL Server, go to continue. So this step here will just specify where that instance is sitting. So I'll choose one of our prod database, continue. So this step here is quite critical to understand, right? So the first thing that I want to point out on this portion here is that when or before the image actually gets created, you are able to modify it before being able to provision it down to your lower environments. So this is quite important because there are times when for example, or this is actually probably for most cases where when you're taking a copy or when your image is based um, on your production database, you may have security or user roles or accounts that are pertinent in production, but they are not valid or they're not relevant in your lower environments, and vice versa, right? You might have user accounts that are that exist in your lower environments, but it doesn't exist in your production copy. And so what this step allows you to do is that it's essentially called a script runner, and you can include a T-SQL script here, to drop any user accounts that may not be valid in your lower environments, and then also creating user accounts or creating roles that is valid. Or rather that's needed in your lower environment. And so you're able to make those modifications before even creating a specific image. And most importantly, this is where SQL Clone and Data Masker integrates with each other. And so, and this kind of goes back, to our whole DevOps story, right? So, again, with all of these compliances, that exist, a lot of companies need to adhere to these compliances. One thing that our solution ensures you is that your sensitive data will never touch your lower environments. And the way that we do this is that, again, using SQL Clone and Data Masker in tandem, you're able to mask the image. And so that way, your sensitive data will never reach your QA, your testing, or your development environment. And so what I have here, I do have a masking set that I created already. So let me just show you what's inside of it, just so you can kind of understand and see the interface. So essentially with our data masker tool, it's essentially a series of rules that you can specify to mask specific components of your database. And once you've created that masking set, you can save it off as a set, as you can see here. So I have this one called DMO6. And once you create that masking set, you all you have to do at that point is literally just drag and drop it into this box here. And so now that I have the masking set defined and I've added it to my modification step, so when I go through the process of creating my image, it will probably be masked. And so that way, I do not have to worry about my sensitive data ever touching or reaching my lower environments. And here I'll just specify the image destination. So one logistical note here, we do recommend that you create or you create the image on a network share or a file share location. And so that way, you have ample space to have it sitting there. And then here we just review the steps. And then once I've given the image name, I can go ahead and create the image. But I'm not going to create an image right now because it'll take a while. But just want to kind of show you that process. So, as you can see, creating an image, is rather, easy doing it through the interface. Once you get the hang of it, you do have the option to run it via PowerShell commandlets. So that way, a lot of those tasks are automated, and you're able to more frequently either create new images or drop images or drop clones as needed. So the same process, kind of goes, for clone. So once images exist, you can create a clone by specifying the image that you want to create it off of. This step here is a fairly new feature that we've added, to SQL clone. So this modification step is identical to what we saw in the image, right? So in addition to being able to modify the image, using a script runner, you're also able to do the same thing with clones. So you can have one image, but say you're wanting to host a clone in a dev environment and hosted a clone in a QA, and then you might have objects or you might have parameters that are distinct, for each environment. So you can actually modify the clone before it gets created in its target environment. So it's the same idea as the script runner for image. Now you're also able to do it on the clone level as well. And then again, just logistics of pointing it to the SQL Server instance, reviewing it, and then you'll be able to create a clone in a matter of seconds. And that's kind of the value that our tool brings when you're actually creating a clone, because spinning up a clone takes seconds, and also it takes a fraction of the disk space on those target locations. So I know that this demo of clone is quite high level. A lot of details, as I'm sure is being left out that you're probably curious with. If you are interested in clone or want more details on it, feel free to reach out to us offline. We'd be more than happy to provide the info that you guys need for this tool, as well as with Data Masker also. Okay, cool. So that's the quick rundown on provision. Let us move back to our slide here. Give me just 1 second as I bring this back up. Okay, so to get back to the presentation here. So in a recent research that we conducted at Redgate, we want to identify how organizations currently provision databases, and then also to assess the importance of provisioning requirements and to ensure adherence to these emerging data protection obligations. And so, just kind of based on what we're seeing here, obviously, we're not, or rather, it's not desirable to use production data in dev and test. And it's something, that again, with our tool and with Clone and with our provisioning suite, it's something that, we will help you to kind of remove that obstacle, from the DevOps process of provisioning your copies, to your lower environments. Okay, so Just want to reiterate that last point again, because it's again, it's a huge portion of your DevOps process. Making sure that you have the proper copies. And now we can get into the second topic that we want to get into, which is monitoring. So, I'm not going to tell you that you should be monitoring because it's a standard practice among DBA professionals. You need to know what's happening and whether you've got issues, failures, or performance problems. But what we are going to talk about is that monitoring is a fundamental aspect of DevOps. It is not just tasks that DBAs are expected to do, but rather it's a critical portion to your development and the key to DevOps success. So at this time, we'll run our last poll regarding monitoring. Again, for some reason, I could not see the poll, so I'll just go ahead and move forward into the next slide. Okay, so with DevOps, comes more deployments, right? And the idea is that you have more frequent, small deployments, and that is, the ultimate goal. And when it goes to production, we have to be able to monitor the impact of that deployment so we're not shocked by what happens. If something does happen, whether in deployment, in development or production, we need to make sure we're aware of it and we're also able to diagnose the cause of the problem to minimize downtime. And we also need to use monitoring to plan for the future, right? So this is an aspect that I think a lot of professionals tend to gloss over. So for example, how much disk space you're using, and then also having the sufficient information to properly allocate resources, within your environment. So the most frequently cited causes of problems, are, for example, running out of capacity, bad deployments and its consequences, and then also ad hoc user access. So all of these, what it tells me is that respondents are all too often, find themselves monitoring the developments passively, and also not having sufficient data to make the correct decisions. So this is also backed up by the aspect of SQL Server monitoring that were almost, rather that were most important to our respondents, and that one thing is being alerted to errors and issues before they become catastrophic problems. So with increasing data protection legislation like GDPR, it's no surprise that security protection is at the top of the list. So 50% of people say security is a key daily responsibility. And although security and protection challenges rank at the top, interestingly, the majority of people are still passively monitoring, right? So they're using the manual methods, they're running scripts, on a need basis rather than proactively monitoring. And also, given that almost 50% of our respondents are already deploying changes multiple times a week, almost no one expects that frequency of those deployments to decrease anytime soon. And thus, the likelihood of issues arising also increases, just with the added stress and with the amount of deployments, teams are making to their production. But with the right monitoring tool in place, for example, you can catch deployment errors, diagnose issues faster, and track and plan a growing estate. They can also provide alerting around each of these areas, giving you ample warning before problems become critical. So Redgate's SQL Monitor, it's a web-based monitoring tool that helps team look after SQL Server environments to be more proactive. Right, so not only does SQL Monitor alert you to current issues, it gives you the information that you need to stop them from happening in the future. And then also with SQL Monitor, even integrates with the Redgate's deployment tools to allow for context to be given and tied in more closely with your DevOps practices. So let's go into the tool and see how it works in practice. So again, let me exit our slide here. and open up SQL Monitor. So SQL Monitor, as mentioned a few moments ago, it is another web-based tool. You can access through our browser, or rather your browser. And this is the first page that you'll see when you access the UI. So this page here is what we call the global overviews page. And its purpose, is just to simply give you a high level or a bird's eye overview of all of the instances that you're monitoring. And the way that it's laid out, every SQL Server instance is represented by these cards here. And within it, you're able to see the name of your SQL Server instance, but provides some metrics such as weights, CPU, and disk I/O for each of those instances. And you also get an idea of the relative health of your instances. So for example, if you're seeing green, the green band within any given card, it's indicating that that particular instance is currently in a healthy state. And if you're seeing red, for example, that's indicating that there is a critical level alert that exists on that particular instance. And the way that we determine the relative health, again, is directly correlated with the alerts that gets triggered within each of those instances. You do have the ability to customize the alert thresholds and settings, or you can just leave it at the default, which comes ready out of the box. But whatever format or whatever threshold that you have it set on, when the alerts gets triggered, it'll correspond to what we see here based on the colored bands. So let's jump into a particular instance and see some more detailed setup data. Cool. So this page here is what we refer to as the instance overview or the server overview page. And the purpose of it is to give you or provide a more detailed set of data for that particular instance. And the first thing that we can see here is this performance graph. So the graph is tracking four metrics. It's tracking CPU, memory, disk I/O, and weights. And you're also able to see a bunch of icons at the very bottom here. So the orange icons are indicating when alerts have been triggered. So if I were to hover over any one of these icons, I could see that there were a bunch of deadlock alerts that have been triggered within this time range. So having visibility like this is quite useful because now you have a visual for when alerts have been triggered, and then also being able to see how it may have affected the performance of your server. And so without this visual, it's hard to see the correlation or see the relationship between when alerts have been triggered and also how it may have affected your instance, but now you're able to kind of see the correlation between the two. And again, going back to our DevOps, principles, with SQL Monitor in particular, it does tie into some of our deployment tools such as change automation, or even if you're just using compare to the deployments, it does have a trigger that Monitor can pick up. And so if you notice that within, or rather right below the graph here, you might also see a red rectangular icon. And if you hover over that icon, here you can see that a, um, a, a deployment had been made at this time. So here I could see that it was a deployment made by our change automation tool. It was triggered at around 3 a.m. this morning. And just like the alerts, you can now see when deployments have been made within that time range, and then also how it may have affected your instance. And so again, being able to have this kind of visibility is quite critical to get a clearer picture of the consequences that either alerts have on your instance, and then also the consequences that deployments have on that target instance. And so again, this is one of the key idea and the key principle as to why having a monitoring tool in place is quite important to your whole DevOps story. And so in addition to the main graph here, we'll provide some diagnostic data. So this comes in a form of top queries and top weights. So by default, the top queries shows the top 10 that's running on your instance, but you can change it to top 25 or top 50 queries that are running on the particular instance. And if you scroll down the page, it provides some general SQL Server metrics, some general host machine metrics. Here you can see all of your existing disk drives on the host machine itself, along with the space used and average read and write time for each drive. We can also show you blocking processes that are occurring on that instance, the user processes that are running, availability groups, processes. These are the system processes that are running on the OS level. And then we can also show you the databases that exist on that particular instance. And from here, you can even drill down one level deeper onto the database level, where you can see a more specific set of database-related metrics. So another key aspect of Monitor, that's quite critical, to the DevOps story is alerts, right? So I think this is one of the key ways, that with a monitoring tool in place, you're able to, stay proactive and stay one step ahead of issues becoming catastrophic. So this page here is called the Alerts tab. It's essentially an inbox for all of the alerts that you're receiving. So as you can see on the left-hand side, this is the hierarchy or the tier that our alerting system is based on. So the number that you see in parentheses is the total number of alerts that we have. So you can look at specific sets or tiers just by clicking into a particular tier. So for example, if I just want to see alerts that got triggered on my SM Dev 2 box, I can just click on that level, and only that set of alerts will show up. And then if I want to be even more granular and just take a look at the alerts that got triggered on a particular instance, say my Dev 4 instance, I can go ahead and do so. And in addition to that, I can also filter out alerts. So I can either filter by alert types, or I can filter by time. So this is again quite useful, to narrow down specific sets of alerts that I want to see for any given scenario or for any given time. And then lastly, the last thing that I wanted to mention regarding SQL Monitor is that with this tool in particular, it's a tool that that gets a lot of love from our developers. It has one of the largest teams that's working on it, and we're continually either enhancing existing features, adding new features, or just simply doing bug fixes, to the tool. So, to keep in line with the whole DevOps story and being able to release faster or more frequently, for anyone that may have used SQL Monitor or have it in place, in their respective workplaces, with Monitor, we shoot to deploy a release of the tool to our users once every 2 weeks. So we do a minor release roughly, once every 2 weeks. We'll do a major version release roughly once a year, and so it's something that we're continually working on, that we're releasing a new version again once every 2 weeks, either doing just simple enhancements or bug fixes or new features that we're looking to integrate into the tool. And so with that last point, one thing that I wanted to show you guys is this tab here called What's New. And so you can either come into our demo site, or if you have it installed in your environment, you can click into this tab, and you're able to see all of the features that we're currently working on that will be integrated into the tool in the near future. And one of the features that I want to point out here is this one called disk capacity planning. So again, kind of going back to the DevOps story here, being able to plan for resources, is a critical portion of the whole process. And as DBAs, this is something that's quite critical also. So prior to having this feature, we're only able to show you the raw disk space usage for any given drive on any given machine. But now we're able to give you an idea of capacity planning, into the future. So these are based on trends of how often or how much your disk usage has grown over time, and we're making that projection for you. So that way, whether it's 6 months down the line or a year down the line, you're able to see and plan accordingly in terms of how much resources you need, for your environment. And so again, this is quite a useful feature in terms of being able to stay one step ahead of any issues occurring. In this case, it's maybe not common, but it's not unheard of. That a company may be in trouble with the amount of resources they have left within their environment. But with having this feature in place within a monitoring tool, you're now able to get a better picture of how much resources you would need to allocate in the near future. So again, one of the key features that we're adding to our tool, and again, being able to kind of review all of these upcoming features is quite exciting to see. The work that we're doing for SQL Monitor. And again, just like with our provisioning suite, I know that there's probably a lot of questions and details regarding SQL Monitor. Hopefully, you're just seeing this amount will whet your appetite. So offline, feel free to reach out to us to get more details on the tool. We'd be more than happy to provide any further info regarding SQL Monitor. Okay, cool. So let's go back to our slide presentation here. Okay, so I know we have roughly 10 minutes left. I just want to just do a quick recap of the webinar. So, with the whole DevOps story, it's something that a lot of companies are slowly adopting. Whether it's from our report or Puppet's State of DevOps report, there's obviously a lot of benefits to companies and to teams adopting a proper DevOps process. And with today's webinar, we focused mainly on provisioning your databases to lower environments, so that way your developers have the proper copies to develop on. And then also we focus on monitoring, right, which allows you to have that visibility into your environment to make sure that you're always one step ahead of issues, and you're not having to firefight, frequently, because as a DBA, and as the demands for your time and the demands for your skills increases, you do not want to be in a position to passively monitor or having to firefight, but rather there's a lot of other value-added activities and value-added tasks that you as database professionals can work on, instead of having to do all of these things manually. Especially when you have a viable solution like SQL Monitor in place to help you give that the visibility into your environment. And all the areas we've spoken about today are included in the Redgate's database DevOps solution, which will help you develop and deploy database changes at the speed the business requires, but at the same time, using the level of, or having the level of control and protection you as a DBA requires. Okay, so with roughly 10 minutes left, I think we can go ahead and do a little Q&A. I think Louise will read off some of the questions that the audience have submitted.
Hi everyone. Yep, so we've got lots of questions for you here, David. Anyone who's sent any through and we don't get time to answer, don't worry, we will get back to you by email. We can see who's asked. So if we don't get to your question, don't panic, we will get back to you. So first up, David, is what is the recommended maximum size of a database to be masked? Would a 1 terabyte database be feasible? And the same with cloning.
Very good question. So with data masker and with masking databases, so 1 terabyte, is something that's within the realm of what the tool can handle. There are ways and there are techniques to improve performance because obviously, there's a direct correlation with, the performance and the time that it takes to mask, with the amount of data you're masking. And I would assume that even with a 1 terabyte database, you're not looking to mask the whole terabyte of data, but maybe like a subset of it, right? So I think there are ways to improve performance. There are ways to make it more efficient, but being able to mask that size database is definitely doable within a tool. And with SQL clone, I mean 1 terabyte is definitely something that's somewhat common within a lot of our among a lot of our users. So as you mentioned earlier, you create an image off of a 1 terabyte database. When you clone it down to your lower environments, it'll be a fraction of the size. And so again, being able to clone a 1 terabyte database is definitely within the realm of the tool.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. Next one is how much slower is executing from a provisioned backup file versus from a live SS server, i.e. our nightly cycle runs in 3 hours from live SS. How long would it be if using the backup file?
Another very good question. So in terms of using backup versus um, a live database, so there's many variables that kind of goes into it. I think mainly there's the variable of network connection between where the live database is sitting and then also where the network share is sitting. If the network connection has sufficient bandwidth, it may be, definitely a lot easier to or a lot faster to create. But if some of those things are not in place or if it's lacking in terms of um, specifics, then yeah, it will take a bit longer time. So in general, what we do recommend, or personally, what I would recommend, is that when you are creating an image, it's probably better to use a backup file, mainly because you're not, accessing, your prod database if you are, planning on provisioning a production copy. And so, it just feels a bit safer to do it from a backup file as opposed to a live database. But if you're running it off hours and you have sufficient bandwidth, the output of it will roughly be the same. You're not going to have much of a leg up with one option to the other. Again, it's a lot of variables that kind of goes into it that that's hard to kind of give you like a more direct answer. But in my opinion, I definitely would recommend creating images off of a backup file just to be on the safe side.
Brilliant. Another one, are there any issues if we have encryption active for our databases?
Another very good question. So if you're looking to uh, create an image off of a database that is encrypted, I believe you do need the certificate to to kind of proceed with the process. If you're looking to encrypt a clone copy, after it's been created, then at that point, so one thing to understand about a clone copy of of a database is that that clone database is essentially, for all intents and purposes, from the perspective of SQL Server Management Studio, it's just another copy of a database. So it has no idea that it's like a clone, as opposed to, an actual live database. And so with that being said, if you want to apply encryption on that clone database, it's not a problem at all. It'll just treat it as if it's a regular database. And then also, if you were, and again, kind of going back to the my original response, if you're looking to create an image or a clone off of a TDA encrypted database, and that should also be not an issue.
Excellent. So we've got a few minutes left, so probably time for a couple more questions. One is, do you have a product that can process a backup log file and generate a report of all users who made schema or data changes to a database?
So we don't have any one product that can achieve all of that, but I think there are a few tools that comes to mind that can help piece together that goal. So I think one thing that might be helpful, is utilizing a tool like SQL Source Control, or even our newly packaged change automation tool. So I think that will kind of give you the audit trail that you're looking for in terms of making changes, or rather seeing who made changes to the database and having the audit trail, so that way you're able to identify who made the change, when it was made, and then also, any more context or notes in regards to that commit. So that's one way that you can kind of see, that visibility within your development process. But more on a server level, or more maybe on a holistic level, we do have another tool within our suite called a state manager. So that kind of gives you more of an auditing of your actual environment. So that will give you, the visibility of all of your SQL Server instances, along with any SSRS, SSIS servers that you have existing in your environment. It'll give you kind of like that inventory list. It'll also give you even more granular info, such as for a given database, it'll show you all the existing tables, and then you're also able to label and tag certain pieces, such as this database here should be tagged as sensitive data, or something that includes sensitive data, or I might want to tag this table here as something that I need to mask, because again, it contains sensitive data. And then from there, you're able to have a clean inventory of your environment, and then also being able to sort by the tags that you've applied to each of those tiers, whether on a server level or even on an object level. And then you can also take a look at the user roles, or the accounts that have access to each of those servers. And another inherent capability of the tool is that you're able to take snapshots on either on a nightly basis, or on whatever frequency that you set it at. And essentially, that's quite useful, because once the snapshot is taken, you're actually able to compare snapshots. That's another function of the tool, where you can see between, say, a snapshot taken back on Friday versus a snapshot taken last night on the 25th. You're able to see kind of like what may have changed within those two environments, or rather those two versions of your environments. And so I think with that component from a state manager, and also just utilizing the inherent audit trail within SQL Source Control, will kind of give you that visibility that any database professionals will need in terms of having the proper audit trail, and then even using those audit trails as like a evidence that you're compliant with certain regulations that you need to adhere to.
Brilliant. Okay, so one last question. Like I said, there are a few we won't be able to get to given the time, but don't worry, we'll get back to you by email with your questions. So last one, David, is it possible to use SQL Monitor to monitor servers on different networks?
Definitely. So one of the the features that that we're enhancing or that we have enhanced in recent months is just the ability to um, monitor networks or sorry, monitor machines that are sitting on different networks or even sitting on the cloud. So we do support any SQL Server instances sitting on, for example, Azure VM or Amazon EC2, and we've even recently added the capability to um, monitor Azure database, which is the platform as a service option. And so those are definitely within the realm of possibilities within SQL Monitor. But if your target environment is not in the cloud, say it's just sitting in a different region, that's another that's definitely within the possibility of SQL Monitor. So one of the features that it has is having um, this capability of what we call distributed monitoring. So essentially, you're able to add a base monitor, to a target location, and both, whether your primary base monitor or the second base monitor will essentially feed the data into one UI. And so, utilizing that option, can bypass any issues with network where your base monitor is sitting on a different network than say the target machine that you're trying to monitor. You can just simply add a second base monitor to that location, and opening up the right web port, and you're good to go in terms of being able to collect data from those target machines.
Brilliant. Yep, so that's all the questions we've got time for today. Thanks very much, David, for your time and for running through all that with us. Like David said, if anyone's got any questions, we will be sending through a copy of the recording and also the slides, which will have all the contact details. So please do get in contact if you have any other questions based on what we've gone through today. And like I say, anyone who's asked questions today that we haven't had time to get to, then we will get back to you. So thanks very much, everyone, and thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you on one of our future webinars also.
All right, thanks everyone. Take care.